Hello everyone, welcome to Talking News for Friday the 9th of June. I'm Howard.
And I'm Pauline.
Let's start with the society news for this week, please. On Tuesday, the strollers will be meeting. The stroll will be at Greenwood Lane, Brading, with lunch afterwards at the Bugle Inn in Brading. The group will meet for coffee at Brading Roman Villa at 10:45am. The next session of Introducing Millbrook House will take place on Tuesday, 13th of June. This is a chance for anybody to come along and discover what's available in terms of equipment or services to visually impaired people. Introducing Millbrook House is open to everyone who would like to find out more about what is on offer. The session runs from 10:30am until 12pm. The Dolphins group will be meeting to swim on Tuesday, 13th of June at the Waterside Pool in Ryde. The pool is closed to the public during the session. If you'd like to go swimming, please call the Society first to advise us of your level of swimming ability. Please note lifeguards are in attendance during the session. On Wednesday, the weekly coffee morning will be held as usual to support the Society. That's the 14th of June. The coffee mornings are not just for blind and partially sighted people. Anybody can come along and have a cup of coffee or tea as well as a piece of cake. On Thursday, the Knitters and Natterers are meeting on 15th of June at Millbrook House. The group starts at 10:30am until 2pm. You can knit or just natter, then later in the afternoon volunteers come in and read to the group from different topics. Other news: the next OWLS session will be meeting on Wednesday 21st of June at 2pm in Millbrook House. The entertainer for the meeting will be Emile Scotcher, and she'll be singing a selection of songs. The group lasts approximately 45 minutes. It's then followed by tea or coffee and cake. General Knowledge Fun Quiz Night on Friday 30th of June at Millbrook House. That's Carisbrooke Road, Newport. 6:30pm for 7pm start. Cost is £3 per person, teams of 4. Ticket prices include nibbles, coffee and tea. A pay bar available for wine and beer. All welcome. If you don't have a team, make one with others. Call 52205 or pay on door. Sourcing accessible TV guides, and especially those highlighting audio-described TV programs, can be difficult. There are web-based large print audio and braille TV guides available. RNIB's Big Print Freeview Guide has the full listing of the top 10 Freeview channels. The Big Print Weekly newspaper contains a TV supplement listing programs on BBC 1, 2, ITV1, Channel 4 and Channel 5. For more information, please visit the RNIB website. That's www.rnib.org.uk, or call them on 030 312 39999. Please note transport may be available to some of the groups, but please call the Society first on 52205.
And now we have the scaffolding news. Right, below we have a list of footwear obstructions for works including scaffolding or hoarding. We're unable to include end dates as many are extended on a week-by-week basis. Also included are tables and chairs permits that have been issued in the past week. In the Bay area, Lloyds Bank, Regent Street, Shanklin and 11 High Street, Brading. Cowes area, development site, Castle Street, East Cowes. 2 Sun Hill Cowes, 43 High Street Cowes, 30 Beckford Road Cowes, Scaffold on Consort Road, 10 Bath Road Cowes. Current hoardings, 272 to 283 Arctic Road Cowes, 93 High Street Cowes. In the Newport area, 8 Mill Street Newport, 34 Orchard Street, Nippert Court West Street, Newport Minster St Thomas's Square, the Guildhall High Street, Red Squirrel Property Shop, that's 11 St Thomas's Square in Newport, Home Bargains, this is Taylor Road, Gunville Road in Carisbrooke, the Spectacle Maker, 81A High Street, Newport, this is due to go up on the 12th of June, Bernard's Shoe Shop, 86A St James's Street, Newport, due to go up on the 13th of June, Penny Lane, the Green Party Shop, 114 St James's Street, Newport, due to go up on the 15th of June. In the Ryde area, 25 George Street, Solent Court, Castle Street, Ryde Street Gallery, 129A High Street, Bembridge Sailing Club, Embankment Road, Bembridge, the Italian Touch, 52 Union Street, Ryde, 54 George Street, Ryde, Land of Roses, 2 Union Street, Ryde, Island Photo Centre, 49 Union Street, Oasis Dental Care, that's in 9 Melville Street Ride, dates not known at the moment. St Mary's Church High Street Ride, they're due up on the 12th of June. The Royal British Legion Club, that's 1 St James's Street Ride, due to go up on the 12th of June. Robert Lee's Hairdressers, 62 Union Street Ride, due to go up on the 12th of June. Town Club Star Street Ride, due up on the 19th of June. Now in the West Wight area, Cornerways, the Broadway Totland, King's Head Key Street Yarmouth, due to go up on the 19th of June. South Wight area, The Grove, Marlborough Road Ventnor, 5 Spring Hill Ventnor, 2 Dudley Road Ventnor, due up on the 12th of June, 20 High Street Ventnor, due up on the 16th of June, and lastly 47 Moorview Godshill, and they're due to go up on the 19th of June.
This week's In Touch programme. This week's episode, Rachel Andrews wanted to vote in the general election held in 2015, but when she and her blind husband arrived at her polling station, the device that was supposed to be in place to help them vote, secretly and independently, couldn't be found. She launched a legal challenge against her local authority to try to change the situation. She tells us why and what the outcome was. Don't worry if you haven't waded through all 7 political party manifestos. BBC political correspondent Gary O'Donoghue has, and he'll be picking out some of the key policies of interest to blind and partially sighted people. In the RNIB's latest survey of blind and partially sighted voters, half say they weren't able to vote secretly or independently on polling day. Campaign manager Hugh Huddy tells us what the RNIB is doing to change the situation. Back in March, listener Ian Brooks was offered a job interview as a programmer until the company heard he had a guide dog, when the interview was cancelled. 3 months on, and Ian's back to tell us what happened next.
Now we're going to read from the Isle of Wight County Press for today, Friday the 9th of June. And the main headline is Villagers' Gun Shock. Armed police responding to reports of a man brandishing a gun surrounded the wrong house in the wrong village twice. A cold caller was threatened with what he believed was a gun after knocking at an address at Jubilee Close Godshill on Tuesday, but police officers mistakenly drove across the island to Jubilee Close Freshwater. Residents were shocked to see such a heavy police presence, including police cars, an unmarked vehicle and a dog unit, descend on their quiet cul-de-sac, where one retired couple were grilled on their whereabouts and asked if they had any enemies. Shirley and Graham Evans of Jubilee Villas arrived home shortly before 5 p.m. to find 4 armed officers flanking their home. They had machine guns pointing at the house, and I was worried they would break the door down. I said, "Excuse me, that's my house," and asked what on earth was going on, said Shirley, 60. Graham, 47, said, "We saw them at the garage as we drove past, getting all their gear on, and said something must be kicking off. We didn't think it would be at our house. It was quite exciting." The couple, who work at Bembridge Coast Hotel, said officers were polite and respectful. Although they described the officers as carrying machine guns, a police spokesman would not confirm the type of firearm used. Officers were then directed around the corner to Jubilee Close, where they banged on the door of Bev and Lou Yateman. The retired couple were not home, but neighbour Sally Balter phoned them. A policeman came on the phone and asked all these questions. Where had we been? Did we own a gun? Did we have any enemies? "I do think it was over the top. It made me feel like a criminal," said Bev. "My family saw pictures of the police on Facebook. They were really worried. I'm just so glad I wasn't there. My great-grandchildren often come round after school. If they had been there, I would have lost it." You can't just say these things happen, because they don't. How do they get it so wrong? I haven't even had an apology. Retired teacher Sally said, "I saw a policeman on the path with a machine gun and a handgun in a holster. They said a cold caller had been threatened with a gun, so I knew right away it wasn't Bev and Lev they were looking for. It was very surreal, more exciting than scary." Neighbour Michael Pope, 73, saw the scene unfold from across the road. "I looked out the window and said to the wife, 'There are police in riot gear outside,' and she said, 'Don't be stupid.' But there they were, fully armed, hammering on Lou's house," he said. "I've never seen armed police on the island before." After 10 minutes, they all sped off again with the lights on. It was a right turn up for the books. The officers arrived at Jubilee Close Godshill at 5:45 p.m, more than an hour after the cold caller was threatened at 4:20 p.m. Our response was based on the information provided to us during the initial 999 call. Further clarification was later provided, which allowed us to establish the exact location of this incident, said the police spokesman. We will review the circumstance of this deployment and whether there's any learning which should be adopted from this review. He was unable to confirm whether the caller had said which town was he in. A 67-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of possession of a firearm with intent to cause fear or violence. He has been released from police custody but remains under investigation.
Red-faced council bosses were forced to suspend the new floating bridge service on Wednesday, just a few hours after its much-anticipated relaunch. Passengers were left temporarily stranded on both sides of the River Medina after the 3.2 million vessel ran aground on the ramp at East Cowes, forcing the council to bring back the launch service. Meanwhile, vehicles that had planned to use the bridge to avoid traffic hold-ups caused by the Isle of Wight festival traffic were forced to turn around. The bridge eventually refloated at around 7 p.m. A spokesperson for the Isle of Wight Council said, "While the crews continue to get used to the dimensions of the new bridge, and when tides turn rapidly, this is a known and normal operational risk." Following Wednesday's grounding at around 2:35 p.m, disgruntled passenger Sam George, 53, of Britannia Way, East Cowes, said he'd missed a job interview in Newport. He said the floating bridge was about three-quarters full of cars. Suddenly there was a lot of grinding and groaning noises. It didn't sound too good, and we were told to get off because it got wedged. It basically ran aground. It's embarrassing for this to happen again, and I'm especially angry because not only did I miss a job interview in Newport, I paid £1.50, asked for a refund, and staff told me to write to County Hall to get one. Another passenger, Jack Wallace, 61, from East Cowes, added, "I've come back from Newtown, and I came this way because of the festival. I'm not well pleased. There's no one here to tell us anything. It's a disgrace." The service had been out of action since May 14th, the day after the vessel launched, and 5 months later than originally planned. Residents and businesses in East Cowes have protested over the state of the service and the impact on the town. Isle of Wight Council's Chief Executive, John Metcalfe, wrote to East Cowes Town Council saying he fully understood the town's frustrations. He also suggested a joint meeting between the authority and both East Cowes and Cowes Town Councils to discuss the issues. East Cowes business owners held a protest on Monday after complaining about loss of trade, increased prices and a subpar vessel. A further protest is planned for today, Friday, at 3 p.m. at East Cowes.
A shocked woman says she's lucky to be alive after she was attacked by a cow. Saffron Anderson, 44, was trampled and flung into the air by the animal as she walked along a footpath near her home in Spanners Close Trail last Thursday. The mother of two, who suffers from a degenerative disease in her spine and has chronic fatigue syndrome, was out walking her dog Betsy when she was confronted by the cow and a calf. She said, "I let Betsy off in a meadow opposite the footpath. I got halfway along and I could hear hooves. I turned round and the cow charged towards me. The cow came straight at my face, sending me flying. It knocked me in the abdomen. It trod on me. It sent me down on the ground and trampled me. I was lying underneath it. I thought it was going to stand on my chest or my head. I scrambled up on my feet and it hit me in the chest again. I flew into the air and ended up in a hedge in brambles. I was lying in the hedge and it came after me again. Ms. Anderson kicked out at the cow and began shouting. Her dog Betsy also began barking, forcing the cow to back away. Shaken and badly bruised, she was then able to scramble over a stile and escape. She said, "My whole body is covered in bruises and my mouth is split." Ms. Anderson was looked after by staff at Chale Stores before going to hospital for treatment. She has since contacted the Isle of Wight Council's Rights of Way department to report the incident. She said, "I could very easily have been killed, and that really worries me. I've worked with cattle in the past. If it had trampled on my head, I don't think I would be here to tell the story." Advice from the NFU said, when walking with dogs in fields with cattle, the advice is to avoid getting between cows and their calves. Keep your dog under close and effective control on a lead, but do not hang on to your dog if you are threatened by cattle. Let it go and allow the dog to run to safety. Fred Coulson, owner of Hawthorne Manor Farm in Chale Green, where the incident took place, advised walkers to carry a stick when crossing land with livestock on it and reiterated the importance of not getting between a cow and its calf.
A short item now. Access to the beach at Compton Bay from the National Trust car park along the Military Road has been closed until July 14th due to drainage works being undertaken near to the steps leading to the beach. The lower section of the steps has had to be moved out of the way to allow the work to take place. Contractors moved in to begin the works on Tuesday.
Joan, 91, still loves adventure. A 91-year-old woman from Binstead is taking on the challenge of a lifetime next month, a tandem skydive. Joan Livingston will plummet 12,000 feet from a plane flying over Sandown Airport in a fundraising leap of faith to raise funds for Age UKIW. Joan, along with 14 other fundraisers, will have an unrivalled view of the Isle of Wight on July the 11th and will then experience 45 seconds of nerve-jangling freefall of speeds of up to 120 miles per hour, followed by a 4 to 5 minute canopy ride back to Earth. Joan, who lives at St Vincent's residential care home, said, "All my life I've taken opportunities for adventure. I've travelled the world on a shoestring and have some incredible stories to tell. As I've got older, I've kept myself busy with lots of social activities, exercise and travelling, but find I can't manage to volunteer as much now, and I wanted to give something back. I heard about the skydive and thought I could still do that." She added, "I'm raising money for Age UKIW, as people should know how much they do to help the island. When you get older, you don't like to admit you can't do certain things anymore, but they are always there and willing to help with anything. They've helped me and so many of my friends with lots of different things. Something as simple as helping filling in a form or doing something around the house can make such a massive difference. My family all live on the mainland, so having Age UKIW here really helps to take away the worry of being on your own." Elisha Leachman, fundraising manager at Age UKIW, added, "Joan is such an inspiration. She spent her whole life making a difference as a teacher and volunteer, and she's still so full of energy and seeking out new challenges. People can sponsor Joan. They can text JLIW91 £3 to 70070 to donate £3.
Bumping into a celebrity in Harrods led to an impromptu day of filming for 10-year-old Rollo Little of Ventnor. He was in London for a few days with Dad Martin to watch some sporting fixtures when they strolled into the famous store for some window shopping. They came across actor and TV talk show host James Corden filming some UK editions of his hit programme The Late Late Show. The crew asked if Rollo wanted to help James out, and it led to a day of fun, filming scenes around different departments within the store. Rollo tested out the remote-controlled toys with the actor, watched him drive around in little cars, was served chocolates by James, who was dressed in Harrods counter uniform. Then, finally, he walked through the Harrods doors as James held them open while dressed in the famous green bellboy uniform. Rollo said, "I didn't really know who he was, but I could tell from everyone's reactions he was really famous. It was fun doing the filming, and I enjoyed doing some acting. The only bad bit was James wouldn't pose for a photo with me, so I'm not his biggest fan." The UK episodes were aired this week on Sky One, with Rollo anxious to find out if he'd made the cut or would be left on the cutting room floor.
Plans to refurbish Forest Road Newport gasification plant have been shelved. The plant, which has suffered repeated breakdowns and breached emissions levels since it was installed in 2009, was due to be refurbished as part of waste contractor Amy's multi-million-pound plans to redevelop the site. But when the company that built the plant, Energos, went into administration last summer, the Isle of Wight Council was unable to find another contractor to carry out the specialist work. Instead, it has opted for an alternative type of energy from waste incinerator to generate energy from waste that cannot be recycled, which will be built by German company Michaelis Environmental Technology. The council was unable to confirm the cost of the work and whether any extra costs would be met by council taxpayers or by Amy. As reported, the council has agreed to borrow £70 million over 3 years to invest in the capital element of the waste contract, which includes redeveloping the Forest Road site. According to letsrecycle.com, it will be Michaelis' first such project in the UK. The industry website reported the incinerator could process 23,000 MW hours of energy per year from 40,000 tonnes of waste. Although energy from the waste element of the redevelopment has now been delayed by a year, the incinerator is due to be completed in May 2019. The rest of the work, which includes building a new mechanical treatment plant to extract recyclable materials from waste, offices and a visitor centre, should be operational by October 2019 as planned. The Council's Cabinet Member for Procurement, Waste Management, Projects and Forward Planning, Councillor Michael Merwill, said the Isle of Wight Council and Amey remain committed to achieving the high-reaching waste targets set out in the contract to divert 90% of waste from landfill and to recycle or compost 55% of municipal solid waste by April 2020. The partnership approach to managing the island's waste services with Amey has helped us to secure a new energy from waste provider with minimal delays to the programme and still achieving the island's desired environmental outcomes.
Plans to ban people from taking larger trailers to the tip have been dropped by the Isle of Wight Council. The authority announced in April trailers over 1.8 metres long would not be permitted at Afton or Linn Bottom recycling centres from Monday, but has backed down following a flurry of complaints. The rule was branded nonsensical as it didn't take into account the length of the vehicle towing the trailer. Instead, following discussions with waste contractor Amey, the council has said vehicles and trailers with a combined length of 7.7 metres, approximately 25 feet, or less, can you continue to use the facilities as usual, regardless of the length of the trailer. Vehicles and trailers with a combined length of over 7.7 metres will not be allowed. In a statement issued on Monday, the council said, following feedback from users of the household recycling centres at Linn Bottom and Afton Marsh, the council, in partnership with Amey, has reviewed the guidance previously issued. The household recycling centres site rules are in place to improve health and safety, reduce waiting times at the recycling centres and reduce congestion during busy times. The Cabinet Member for Procurement, Waste Management, Special Projects and Forward Planning, Councillor Michael Merwill, said, with more than 200,000 visits by members of the public each year to Linn Bottom Centre alone, it's important that the Council and Amey take considerations of the safety of all users, public and staff. This includes ensuring safe vehicle movements and reducing queuing. Following a review of the site rules, this revised position will still enable us to make sure safety is paramount and users will still be able to access the sites safely.
It's not every day you get a wild animal hitching a ride on a car ferry, but that's the sight that greeted passengers on the Red Eagle 9 a.m. sailing from Southampton on Monday. A tiny wild rabbit was spotted hopping around the car deck, much to the amusement of passengers. A group of Red Funnel staff worked hard at capturing the creature, finally scooping it up and keeping it safe in a catering department cardboard box. County Press editor Allan Marriott was on the crossing and said, "The passengers were getting excited and I saw the crew pick up the bunny and keep him safe in a box. No one had any clue to how he got there, but credit to the crew for their caring attitude and for letting some curious children have a quick peek. As we went back to our car, a member of staff was trying to find a spare lettuce leaf to give the rabbit something to munch on."
It's taken 15 months and the intervention of the County Press, but finally a family from Sandown have got a new black bin. Waste contractor Amey delivered the new bins and gull-proof sacks to houses across the island in March 2016, but some residents on Albert Road, Sandown, were missed out. The Ward family, who were allocated a green bin and had been putting their black bags of rubbish on the street, only to be slapped with a sticker saying the bags were not permitted. Austin Ward, 36, who lives in Albert Road with his wife and 3 children, said the council had failed to answer his numerous phone calls. "In this warm weather, I don't want my black bags lying around outside, so I took them to the tip. It's very frustrating and annoying, and it's not even a case of the council passing the buck. The phone just rings and rings until eventually it cuts off." An Isle of Wight Council spokesperson said Amey had now delivered a bin to Mr Austin and didn't believe other residents were affected. They thanked the County Press for bringing this issue to their attention. "As soon as we became aware this gentleman was missing receptacles, the required bins were delivered so he can join the rest of the island in helping to reduce our costly landfill and increase our recycling ambitions. We're not aware of any further properties in Albert Road requiring replacement bins and have no records of any outstanding orders. However, we would encourage residents to save time and order replacement receptacles online by visiting the Do It Online sections on www.iwight.com/waste.
The new operator of Island Line, First MTR, is set to spend around £2 million on improvements to the 8.5-mile route, according to the Isle of Wight Council's transport boss. Speaking at a meeting with the Isle of Wight Bus and Rail Users Group on Saturday, Councillor Ian Ward, Cabinet Member for Transport, said the authority had met the new South Western franchise holder when the cash boost was revealed. He said they need to bring the stations up to scratch. They want to bring the route up to modern travelling standards that passengers expect elsewhere. Councillor Ward said he had met the government's rail minister several months ago, who was totally on side about maintaining Island Line. However, he added, all they are really concerned about is the massive loss it makes. He recognised it will never make a profit. It is not the case of saying unless it makes a profit it will close. What he said was you have to curb the losses. Earlier in the meeting, Richard Tildesley, Southern Vectis General Manager, said a meeting had been scheduled with First MTR to discuss better coordination between bus and rail services. Potential service improvements could also be put in place for the company's winter timetable, particularly with Route 7, that's the Newport to Freshwater route, Sunday service, where its frequency could be restored to once an hour. Secretary of the Isle of Wight Bus and Rail Users Group, Andy Morris, said the organisation was very aware of the funding constraints faced by the Isle of Wight Council and hoped the council would prioritise funding the concessionary fares scheme.
Towns and villages hit by bus service cuts have called for a key Southern Vectis seasonal route to be opened up to island residents using concessionary bus passes. Currently, the Coaster Summer Service, which runs from Ryde to Allan Bay and Yarmouth via Ventnor and the Military Road, is designated as a tourist service, which exempts it from the England National Concessionary Travel Scheme, that's ENCTS. Now, Chale, Chillerton and Gackham, Freshwater, Knighton and Whitwell, Totland and Ventnor Town and Parish Councils have joined forces to write to the Isle of Wight Council, which administers the scheme, asking for the exemption to be withdrawn. They say the extra services would help offset problems in the villages and towns caused by the reduction of services on routes 6 and 12, which connect the areas. Knighton Parish Councillor John Young said, Southern Vectis' own website advertises the coaster as an asset for those lucky enough to live on the island. Concessionary travel is a policy area devolved to the Isle of Wight Council, and as we understand it, it's for the council to decide which services are eligible. Residents see these buses going past their door, and they really don't understand why they have to wait for a different one. I can't see why the Isle of Wight Council would not support communities by doing as we asked. An Isle of Wight Council spokesman said the council is currently considering a request to consider island coasters' inclusion into the ENCTS, and will provide a response as soon as possible to the parish and town councils.
Secondary school students could be accepted at the Bay CE Primary School in a bid to offset the proposed closure of Sandown Bay Academy. The proposal came after the Academy's Enterprise Trust, AET, announced plans to close Sandown Bay Academy and send students to Ryde Academy. A petition has been launched on the Bay Primary idea in the wake of the Academy's Enterprise Trust announcing plans to close the existing secondary school and relocate pupils to Ryde Academy. Dave Stewart, Isle of Wight Council leader, announced plans to support the governors at the Bay Primary in changing their admission criteria so Sandown has one all through 4 to 16 or 4 to 18 school, providing education on the two sites as at present. Isle of Wight Council member Chris Whitehouse, who leads on education, said, I'm delighted parents of children in the Sandown area have launched a petition to back the suggestion. The Bay Primary School expands to step into the breach, which will be left if AET proceed with their threat to pull out of providing secondary education in Sandown. Meanwhile, Julian Critchley, Labour parliamentary candidate, wrote to head teachers of local schools likely to be affected by the closure, asking them to oppose AET's closure plans. On Monday, the council will launch a consultation exercise to seek local views on the proposal.
A fierce condemnation of the lack of banking and post office facilities in Cowes, particularly with Cowes Week just weeks away, was led by a town councillor. At a meeting of Cowes Town Council last Thursday, Councillor John Nicholson said it was very remiss one of the foremost yachting centres in the world, had been left with no banking facilities, no post office within 500 metres of the town centre. He said anyone using the town recently and looking for cash will likely have found no joy, as the few remaining cash machines regularly run out or break down, and, I'm told, the likes of Sainsbury's can't keep up with the resultant demand for cash from its tills. What sort of message does this give to visitors? The post office was the last fallback on this, and, if you remember, the one the banks used as an excuse for their withdrawal. He added, similarly, traders state they have nowhere now to deposit or obtain cash, as even the mobile bank cannot handle the sums they have to deal with. And that's now. What's it going to be like in the summer season, especially when we have yachting events? Councillor Nicholson also raised concerns about the lack of parking facilities in the town. Cowes Mayor Councillor Paul Fuller said the council should work with Cowes Business Association to produce a leaflet to inform residents and visitors where they could obtain cash. Existing cash machines could also have signs pointing out where alternative cash machines were. As previously reported, Cowes lost its last high street bank, Lloyd's, earlier this year, and the post office has been relocated to the Co-op in Mill Hill Road. There are comments on this in our letters column.
Complaints about energy and communication companies saw islanders awarded almost £21,000 last year. According to figures released by Ombudsman Services, islanders made 150,000 complaints about products or services, the lowest in the country. In fact, almost 200,000 complaints were not pursued because customers decided it was too much hassle. On the island, 146 complaints were referred to Ombudsman Services. Those complainants received £20,809, an average of £143 each. Chief Ombudsman Lewis Shan Smith said, "It's important people know their consumer rights and don't put up with bad service. Complaining should be an easy, hassle-free experience. If you're still in dispute with an energy or communications company after 8 weeks, Ombudsman Services can look into the case for free and provide a resolution. It could be worth your while."
A popular West Wight cycle route is to be partially closed from Monday for up to 6 weeks for bridge works. A 600-metre stretch of path south of Yarmouth Mill between the Causeway, Freshwater and Thorley Road, Boldner, will be affected. The work by Island Roads will include strengthening the bridge. There will be a temporary footbridge alongside the cycleway, but there will be times when no access will be available and the route is not advisable for horse riders. The timing of the work has been criticised by cyclists and walkers as it's being done during the holiday season. But an Island Roads spokesman said, because the cycleway is well used, Island Roads had initially planned to undertake this vital repair and enhancement work in the winter months, so as not to disturb the rare bird life that uses the habitat over the winter period. However, following consultations with statutory bodies around the project, one of the marine licence conditions imposed by the Marine Management Organisation is we cannot carry out work between October and April. In agreement with the Isle of Wight Council, we will, however, be undertaking a number of steps to maintain as much access as possible across this route during the work. Although the notice is for a complete closure, in practice a temporary walkway will be provided and pedestrian access through the site, including use by wheelchairs, will be maintained for most of the works period. A full closure will only be required for limited times when hazardous operations such as lifting heavy concrete beams into place are carried out, and advance notices for these will be provided.
How to become the boss of diabetes as a teenager. Being a teenager is not easy, but coping with diabetes at the same time is a real test of character. Charlotte von Meegeren, 15, and Hannah Stamp, 12, who have type 1 diabetes, which needs daily doses of insulin by injection or pump, describe their experiences to help others who might face the challenge. Charlotte of Undercliff Gardens, Ventnor, was diagnosed at 11. "I became very thirsty and exhausted all the time. I remember going out for dinner with my friend and I couldn't eat my meal because of how dehydrated I felt," said Charlotte. "At this point, my dad, a type 2 diabetic, tested my blood sugar levels with his kit and they were high. The diagnosis was a bit of a shock. Fortunately, we found out early on, so no long-term damage had been done. I knew nothing about diabetes, so it took a while to get used to, but now it is absolutely fine." Hannah, of Colnuts Road, Haylands, was diagnosed in January 2016. She'd been at Isle Jump Trampoline Park in Sandown when the first symptoms became obvious. I was unable to jump for more than a minute at a time. I was short of breath and had rib pain, she said. Mum and Dad took me to A&E and tests showed there was a problem. I felt shocked and scared at having to have injections, and I was unable to deal with it that night. But by the next morning I was a lot calmer and adapted quickly. The importance of diabetics getting into a daily routine of managing their condition through diet and the activities they enjoy is paramount. This includes guarding against the dreaded hypoglycemic attack or hypo, which can occur suddenly day or night. Hypo symptoms range from hunger, nervousness and shakiness to sweating, confusion and dizziness. Untreated, a hypo can lead to a diabetic coma. Charlotte and Hannah check their blood sugar levels and count the carbohydrates they eat to calculate the amount of insulin they need. They have to be prepared for hypos with equipment and medication. Hannah said, "Diabetes is in everything I do. I have a fairly timetabled life with diabetes. I can adapt it around things which are happening. Mum said I had to be the boss of it, not it of me." A paediatric diabetics team at St Mary's Hospital monitors both Charlotte and Hannah. Charlotte said, "I try my best to deal with my diabetes by keeping control of what I eat and prioritising my medication no matter what. At the beginning that was quite difficult. However, over time I have learnt shortcuts which have made it easier. I can still eat sweets and treats as long as I inject the correct amount of insulin to compensate. When it happened, I was worried it would stop me doing certain things, but it hasn't stopped me playing sports and going on trips. Most type 1 diabetics have a hypo at some stage, and the symptoms can differ for everyone and be frightening at times. I try to manage this by eating a snack before I play sports," said Charlotte. "Luckily, I can tell when my levels have gone low as I feel shaky and become hot. My mum can always tell because I look very pale. Occasionally, I may have a hypo during the night, but luckily it tends to wake me up in time for me to deal with it. I also stay prepared by always carrying glucose tablets." Hannah's symptoms are easy for her and her parents to recognise. "Hypos make me weak and shaky, which is scary. I can have them at any time and they can make me behave a little bit silly, make me laugh and talk rubbish. I'm very aware of the feeling and I test my sugars immediately."
For a teenager with diabetes, having to inject insulin can cause self-consciousness. "I only feel self-conscious when I'm in public, if people stare," said Hannah. "I worry about going on holiday, about people seeing the bruising on my legs where I inject." Charlotte said she had no problems with insulin injections, apart from when she's out and about. "In public, it's hard to know what to do, where to do it, and you don't want people to know what you're doing," said Charlotte. "At school, they gave me a room where I can inject in private. This makes things a lot easier." Both Charlotte and Hannah seem to have a very positive attitude and enjoy their lives without diabetes interfering too much. "I think I accepted the condition quickly and now simply take it in my stride," said Hannah. "I'm quite a positive person. I have to deal with it, and no, I don't have a choice, although always having to test my blood sugar is frustrating as it can hurt." Charlotte admits to becoming frustrated occasionally at always having to plan when she eats and to be aware of hypos. "These issues are easy to get around as long as I know what to do. In the future, I might have to consider getting a pump, as it will give me more flexibility about when and what I eat," said Charlotte. "The only thing that worries me is making sure I take care of myself so there are no health concerns in the future, such as eye problems. Having family and friends around them to talk about how they feel and the way diabetes can control their moods and to support them when they're having a hypo is important. It's likely to become easier to manage diabetes thanks to developments in technology and medicines. I'm optimistic. With advances in diabetic treatments, I'm hopeful there'll be a cure," said Charlotte.
A young Bulgarian student so haunted by a wartime story passed down the generations in his family has visited the island in a bid to track down the family of a young soldier he believes died at enemy hands. A century ago, the Newport parents of Lieutenant Wilfred Cyril Williams of the 12th Service Battalion Hampshire Regiment learned that their 23-year-old son had lost his life in combat thousands of miles away. The officer, who studied maths at Pembroke College, Oxford, before war broke out, was one of thousands of British troops sent to the Balkans in 1915, where Greece bordered Bulgaria and Macedonia, in what became known as the Salonika Campaign. With Germany allied to Bulgaria, the British were helping their Greek allies by creating a defensive line, preventing the Bulgarians marching into Greece, an area known as the Doran Front. With a no-man land between the forces, the 12th Battalion's actions were restricted to artillery and patrols. On September the 24th, 1916, while on patrol near Kalinova, Lieutenant Williams and a fellow lieutenant ran into trouble, were wounded and were unable to return. According to a report in the Isle of Wight Mercury of Friday, October the 20th, 1916, Lieutenant Williams had been wounded 3 times but continued to use his rifle. The regiment reported that the 2 men never returned and it was presumed they had died of their wounds. But Clerk Branchko-Goev, working at a field hospital close to the village of Fukar on the Doran front, remembered the day a prisoner, an English lieutenant, was brought in to have his wounds dressed prior to interrogation. The officer, whose hands were tied, was only slightly wounded and gave his name as Cyril Williams from Newport, Isle of Wight, but refused to answer any other questions. Branchko could sense the soldiers were impatient and determined to get information out of him, wanting to know about the size and location of the British Army units in the area. Later that day, as he was going home, Branchko was horrified to see Lieutenant Williams's body lying in a ditch by the side of a road, partially buried, but he recognised the uniform trousers and the tied hands. He later recalled there were no graves around, nor were there any other buried bodies. Our soldiers were passing by, but no one asked anything about the Englishman half buried by the road. This was Cyril Williams, who I entered in the slightly wounded column and who evidently kept silent to the end, and that is why they killed him. The man's face haunted him, and in later life he often recalled the episode, so much so his son Ilya Goev, aged 10, wrote it down and wrote a short story based on his childhood and the account of the islander's death.
Bancho Goev's great-grandson, Ilya Georgiev, a Bulgarian PhD student studying marine law at the University of Groningen, Holland, learned the story of Lieutenant Williams while translating his grandfather's story from Cyrillic Bulgarian into English. He visited the island last month to search for the islander's family home and for any of his descendants, with the hope he could share his family story. Ilian said, "I'm very glad I could visit Newport, and I'll attempt to call a few numbers in the phone book to see if I could find anyone related to Lieutenant Williams. With regard to the village of Furka, it still exists. The village was, during the war, part of the Kingdom of Serbia, Croatia and Slovenia, before the formation of Yugoslavia next to the border with Greece, a region which was populated largely by ethnic Bulgarians. There are many abandoned military graves and grave markers there, as well as remnants and artifacts from the battles. There were numerous British expeditions in the 2000s. Nowadays it's located in Macedonia, and the ethnicity of the region has changed. I believe Lieutenant Williams was brought there and the military infirmary stationed there due to the fact the headquarters of the famous Bulgarian general Vladimir Vatsov was stationed in that village or next to it. Lieutenant Williams was born in Newport on June 11, 1894, the eldest son of butcher John Henry Williams and his wife Annie. He was educated at Abingdon School, Oxford, before he went to Pembroke College and the Officer Training Corps. He was commissioned into the 12th Hampshire Regiment when he was still in training at Basingstoke. Attached to the 26th Division, he moved to Bath in May 1915 and then on to Sutton Veny, Wiltshire in September 1915. He was sent to France that same month and sailed from Marseille on November 15th. He arrived in Salonika 10 days later, serving as part of 79 Brigade of the 26th Division. His death is commemorated at the Doiron Memorial in Greece, but he had not received a proper military burial. Ilian hopes that by publicising the story, someone from Lieutenant Williams' family might eventually read it and discover what happened to him.
Being scammed or targeted by fraud can have a devastating impact on some of the most vulnerable on the island, but the Isle of Wight Council's Trading Standards has set up a new group aimed at giving people more protection against it. Trading Standards launched the Isle of Wight Against Scams Partnership, IWASP, initiative at Newport's Riverside Centre. The group also aims to take the sting out of being a victim of scams, doorstep crime and fraud by offering people support. At the launch, Trading Standards Inspector James Potter spoke about the group's belief the island can provide a united front against scams and make itself a hostile area for fraudsters. He said the group would improve awareness of the types of scams and fraud, provide information that can protect them from it, and importantly for victims, remove the stigma and embarrassment of being a victim. IWASP aims to improve safeguards against scams and fraud, particularly for the more vulnerable, as well as take steps to make it more challenging for scammers to reach their victims. More will also be done to bring perpetrators to justice and introduce more deterrents against them, such as cancelling contracts and seizing their assets. IWASP said it would also provide appropriate financial support for those who have lost money from being scammed. If you think you or someone you know might be the target of a scam, contact Trading Standards on 823371.
That's the end of part one of this week's news. It's goodbye, good wishes from Howard.
And from Pauline.
Good morning, everybody. This is Imelda.
And this is Paul. And we'd like to start with the letters for June the 9th. Progress like watching dripping tap. I would like to congratulate Southern Water on its achievement of turning a 6-week roadworks project at Yarbridge, to one now lasting for 5 months, thereby increasing its customers' bills and its contractors' profits. The sorry sight of lengthy traffic queues waiting to pass minimally manned workings has now become routine. However, just to add spice to the waiting, today the temporary lights appear to have suffered a malfunction and all lights were stuck on red, necessitating manual control. I have one question to put to Southern Water. How much longer is this sorry mess going to continue? It was due to end by the middle of March, but now threatens to last until the high tourism season is upon us. I hate to think what things would be like if that were to occur. Sadly, the spectacle of Southern Water missing out on their promised completion date is not a new phenomenon in Brading. I am sure many residents will remember the fiasco of the laying of the water main along Quay Lane. In that case, the work was supposed to have lasted 10 weeks. It lasted nearly a year. What on earth are we paying these people for? They seem to be incapable of organising a civil engineering project on any scale.
And this one is from Mr. M. White of Newport. Cabbies so vulnerable to assault and worse. May I respond to your report on the attack on Newport taxi driver on the 27th of the 5th, 27th of May? I was a taxi driver for more than 45 years on the island, and I don't think people realise the number of assaults and verbal abuse taxi drivers suffer for just doing their job. Over a 20-year period, up to 2 years ago, there were 65 murders of taxi drivers in this country. These figures were obtained from the National Private Hire Association and do not include violent assaults or stabbing, for those are just too numerous and unfortunately do not get the backup from the police or local authority. Most taxi drivers are self-employed and just cannot afford time and money to pursue compensation claims. The local authority licensing department live in their own little cocooned world, and if they were confronted with some of the issues faced by drivers on a daily basis, they would go for compensation claims as they have the backing of a powerful union or the council. The response to this incident by the council are 2 attention notices on South Street taxi ranks stating no bad or disrespectful behaviour, damage to vehicles or fouling of vehicles, etc. will be tolerated. Does the council or licensing department honestly believe a person who is under the influence of drink or drugs is going to read a notice attached up a pole 6 or 7 feet high and take any notice of it? The council also create problems by encouraging taxi customers to approach any taxi for hire on the rank. All over the world, and in some countries like Spain, there are notices stating first taxi on, first taxi off. This is rank etiquette. All cabs have meters which are sealed and the fare imposed by the local council. It would be nice if taxi drivers got the backing of the local authority and the police if and when incidents arrived. What other profession in this country has had 65 murders? There isn't one. These figures are just swept under the carpet.
There's a letter from Councillor John Nicholson, Isle of Wight Council member for Cowes, South and Northwood. Who would ever have thought such an established town as Cowes, a main gateway to and from the island, could be left without a single bank or post office branch within reasonable walking distance of the town centre? I was born and have always lived in the Cowes district. I remember my dad took me down to the town to open my first bank account, and I remember the majesty of the old post office, always full of people at the bottom of Market Hill. How times change, but not always for the better. How can Cowes, one of the world's premier yachting destinations, have no bank nor town centre post office? What message does that send to visitors or residents? Cowes is closed for business. This year's Cowes will have the greatest number and most diverse participating hostelries in the Bergening area, annual beer and blues buses extravaganza, but we fail to facilitate those aspirations. With no town centre post office, no banks and inadequate cash machines that are always running out. Since my personal elevation of the campaign to get some sense out of the post office, which the closing banks affirm as the fallback facility for Cowes, I have had people approach me saying it is more than a weekly occurrence that the few remaining cash machines run dry. The town's major stores cannot keep up with demands for cash back. One town centre hostelry told me it gave out £800 in cash back to guests last Saturday, and that has become a regular requirement because of lack of facilities. What is it going to be like in the height of the season? What are traders supposed to do? Cash-paced business like pubs now tell me they have nowhere to facilitate their cash requirements, and with our roads and traffic flow being in constant turmoil and parking being such a problem, what does it do for cost of business and the environment to force yet more trips to Newport? This disregard is a real slap in the face for Cowes, and an indication of how little banks care about truly supporting communities. The post office has, to all intents and purposes, abandoned its declared public purpose by its failure to consult in any meaningful way, nor to consider the people it purports to serve. This was evidenced when it was brought to my attention there were other well-situated applicants in the High Street and Birmingham Road. I am told were turned down for such disingenuous reasons as not opening another branch within 0.7 miles of an existing branch before Mill Hill existed. Our former MP Andrew Turner had identified the post office had failed to abide by its own code of practice in dealing with the Cowes situation, and he had started to raise questions in the House. At Planning Committee we have government guidelines on acceptable walking distances for significant amenities from a town centre, being between 200 and 400 metres. This government table is used for ASDA. It flies in the face of the Post Office spurious assertion that 0.7 miles is reasonable. Interestingly, I was told that a small sub-post office that was in York Street made a £32,000 profit just from post office business alone, before it was forced to close by its masters. There is a peculiar disease that pervades some quarters of this country, mainly but not exclusively in the public realm, and it is a sickness that needs to be killed off because it is strangling our well-being and prosperity, and that is losing sight of rational objectives and irrationally making the process, the focus, the issue, and ultimately the problem.
White sun not shining on me, from Phillip Echols of Whitwell. Firstly, I would like to commend Captain Blanche on the White Sun as being the first person on the Whiteling staff to actually come out and give the real reason why a timetable cannot be adhered to. We all know it is due to the building work and not mechanical or harbour improvements or low tide. Following on from this, however, the level of services being offered on the Fishbourne to Portsmouth route at the moment is a disgrace. I feel extremely pity for the staff for the amount of grief they must be facing every day from angry customers, most of whom will be on holiday and not have to endure this every day. I know a response will come following the party line saying we are building for the future, but what about the now? How is a business like mine supposed to work when I lose nearly a day's work each fortnight just waiting for my booked ferry to leave? Should I send an invoice to Whitelink? I'm extremely worried about this week. With all the festival traffic I'm bound to get stuck in. I have deadlines to meet, a thing Whitelink at the moment don't appear to have. Over the last 2 years, I have watched and listened with interest to the growing support for the fixed link, which will, I am sure, eventually happen. I doubt it will be in my working life, but I think it will. This doesn't help me now, while I sit on the white sun, a whopping 1 hour and 40 minutes late, and won't help through the rest of this summer and beyond. Is there anything we can do right now other than sit in our vehicles and queue like proper British people do? I doubt it.
There's a letter from Allan R Jones at Ryde. Planners ignoring local views. I think the strategy of the Isle of Wight planners needs a major overhaul regarding building on greenfield sites outside a development envelope. Why have a planning committee that has a gun held to its head? I am referring to the disgraceful way the Westridge Farm site application was conducted by Wendy Pereira, Head of Planning. After deferring the application twice and waiting for the May elections, which brought about a fresh planning committee, she finally got the result she wanted, approval, despite a recommendation of refusal by Ryde Town Council, which listened to local views. I feel sorry for the Holiday family who are going to lose 11 acres of prime grazing ground, and to 210 objectors who have been ignored. After Pennyfeathers, 904 dwellings, Mitchell's Road 79, the Old Warner's Holiday Camp 128, behind 63 Ashley Road 12, and Westridge Farm 80, the Rosemary Vineyard and application 179 is a foregone conclusion.
Nourishing young people to flourish, and this is from Mallard Healing, the director of the Youth Trust. Recently, I was giving a talk about mental health to a room full of 5-year-olds. We talked about how it was okay not to always feel happy and to sometimes feel sad or angry. But when these emotions become the overriding feeling all the time, then perhaps that might be the time to ask for help. Immediately after the talk, some of the children followed me outside the classroom, and they tearfully said they needed help, as they felt sad or angry all the time. Over the past few weeks, the Isle of Wight Youth Trust has been conducting an island census of the state of mental health of the island's youngest residents, surveying children and young people from the age of 4 up to 24 years of age. While we are still currently collating the results, the exercise in conducting the census with the support of many of the island's schools was itself hugely revealing. In relation to the class where some of the children followed me outside the classroom and were openly crying, this school is in an area with some of the highest level of deprivation on the island, where we might naturally expect there to be greater need. Yet I am not worried about these kids. because this is a school where the children are nurtured as individuals and where compassion pervades. A school where I heard a story that morning about a very young child who came into class that day angry. In response, rather than shout at the child to behave himself, the teacher instead wisely asked the boy if he was given breakfast at home that morning. Upon learning the child had not eaten, the teacher paid for the breakfast for the child out of her own pocket. As a result of the child being treated with compassion, led by an individual teacher, he then had a completely different day in school than how it had begun. Through visiting many schools, I saw a wide range of cultures, which were often apparent upon entering the school doors. In some schools, the ethos was predominantly focused on discipline. In one school, I was ordered to stand outside the assembly hall and keep quiet until I was called in to speak, and the pupils were also spoken to in the same dictatorial way. In another school, I was told about low expectations they had for their pupils, who were mainly low-ability students. All this has huge implications in relation to the state of mental health of our island's young people. Having worked with young people from some of the island's toughest neighbourhoods in the past, I know how much of an achievement it is for some young people to simply get out of bed in the morning amid the chaos going on at home. Yet when kids from such background come into school and are shouted at or humiliated for having the wrong clothes, forgotten books, or not being able to concentrate in class, the damage can be irreversible. When we become preoccupied with discipline, as opposed to seeing young people as individuals who have lives outside of school, some harder than others, it can unwittingly disempower them. It is clear there are incredible teachers in these schools, which have gone through a lot of changes, upheaval, and suffered numerous funding cuts, affecting resources and morale of the education system on the island. As an island, we must together focus on ensuring both our young people and our island teachers have the support they both need to flourish in schools. When we empower our most vulnerable young people to create positive change for themselves and focus on their futures, we in turn will uplift their self-confidence and raise their aspirations, helping to put them on a different track in life.
Well, we now go to looking back. 100 years ago, June the 9th, 1917, the Isle of Wight County Council decided to take serious measures to try to stamp out venereal disease. The county medical officer put forward schemes for the diagnosis and treatment of the disease, including the use of the laboratory at the Royal Portsmouth Hospital. There was to be a skilled medical officer and all the instruments, dressing and drugs that would be needed. The cost of the scheme was £824. That doesn't sound much, but it's £52,457 in today's money, which would be split between the local board and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Also this year, to keep alive the memory of his wife, the late Lady Tennyson, and their youngest son Harold, Lord Tennyson placed a white and pink alabaster in the Afton Chapel at Freshwater Parish Church. Harold was killed on active service aboard the HMS Viking in the English Channel. Lord Tennyson said he gave his life to serve his God, his king and his country in defence of truth, liberty and justice.
And 75 years ago, on June the 13th, 1942, there were 3 conscientious objectors from the island put before a tribunal in Reading. In a statement, one applicant, Dudley Croft Good of Blackwater, said to associate himself with war was utterly unthinkable. He said, "The whole of humanity is my nation, and I have a great desire to be of service to it." He said when he was 15, he looked at the world and felt what a terrible mess of evil there seemed to be, and how ghastly the suffering and brutality of war was. The chairman noted his objections were more philosophical than conscientious, and placed him in non-combatant service. And also, the island's chief educational executive received a letter from the Board of Education congratulating him on the help Newport School Canteen gave areas affected by the air raids. In the fortnight following the raids, 7,760 hot meals were sent to places which had suffered, and meals were still provided for the schools in the borough and 3 county schools too.
We move on now to 50 years ago, June the 9th, 1967. A meeting of the Conservative Association at Ryde concluded the best course of action to secure Britain's future in the face of its declining empire, was to join the European Economic Community. Conservative MP Alderman Mark Woodnut said he hoped the country would take its rightful place at the heart of things in Europe. And also, the island was bestowed with the dubious honour of having the most hydraulic evacuators per square mile than anywhere else in the UK. The Cheek brothers of Church Lytton took delivery of 3 Whitlock 305 evacuators, giving them a total of 17, almost as many as the entire island combined. The machines cost a whopping $3,300, $54,966 in today's money, and were described by Managing Director F.R. Dabell as near to a mechanical man as we will ever get.
And 25 years ago, on June the 12th, 1992, dog fouling was such a problem, the South Wight Environmental Health Chiefs considered investing in a £50,000 a year pooper scooter. Members of the committee agreed to allow officers to investigate purchasing the machine. The decision came in response to continuing complaints from the community, with the latest being a 185 name petition from parents and children at Gatton and Lake Primary School, exhorting the council to get tough with offenders. And plans to bring 50 Russian orphans on a trip to the Isle of Wight were thrown into chaos when the organiser announced £4,000 was still needed to make it happen. Mark Coote, a part-time history teacher at Medina High School, said, "I may have to sell some of the contents of my house if things do not work out, but I sincerely believe that islanders will be generous enough to raise this money." The Russian orphans were due to visit the island for 4 days, and although a portion of their fees had been covered, 4,000 needed to be found within 2 weeks.
We'll now move on to 10 years ago, June the 8th, 2007. A Newport couple pledged to leave their £200,000 bungalow as a legacy for the Isle of Wight Society for the Blind. They also hope to encourage other blind and sight-impaired islanders to socialise more by donating their Scandinavian log cabin to the society. David and Sylvia Reed spent £2,700 having a pine log cabin transported from Finland to their front garden of the home in Furlongs, Newport, so the society could hold social functions for its users. We now go on to White Memories, Tales from the Island's Train Lines. It is hard to believe, but now, not long ago, the island had nearly 60 miles of railway lines. It passed through every town and village that was worth visiting, and quite a few that weren't. There was a time the train took the main strain of travel in the Wight. Most passengers were happy to wait until the trains had reached the station before getting out, but not all of them. In 1906, Herbert Beard, a patient at Ventnor Hospital, attacked another patient with a knife. The police were called and he was arrested, but as the county press explained, A startling sequel occurred while a prisoner was being taken to Newport the next morning in charge of Sergeant Cass. The word starting is just about covers it. At Ventnor West Station, the two men got into compartments sitting in the window seats opposite each other. The train set off, and after a brief stop at St Lawrence Station, it entered the tunnel that ran under the downs to Whitwell, plunging the unlit compartment into darkness. When the train emerged into the daylight, Sergeant Cass found he had the compartment to himself. Mr. Beard had vanished. In the darkness, inches from the sergeant's knee, he had managed to open the carriage door and jump from the train as it sped through the tunnel. Sergeant Cass heard the click of the door as it came to, and puzzled reached out for Beard, but all he felt was empty space, for the bird had flown. Once out of the tunnel, Sergeant Cass pulled the communication cord, and the train came to a halt at Dean Crossing on the Whitwell Main Road. With two passengers, he made his way into the tunnel, where he saw Beard sitting up. By the time I reached him, he was lying down as if dead. He was carried on a stretcher to Whitwell Station, seemingly unconscious, and put in the waiting room. But Sergeant Cass was suspicious. Everyone pretended to move away, but the sergeant crept back to find Beard sitting up, none the worse for wear. No chances were taken this time. When the next train came, Beard was locked in a carriage and taken to Newport Police Station. He appeared in court in April and was found guilty, but totally unfit to undergo prison discipline due to his state of health. Excuse me. Instead, he was sent to a workhouse infirmary in Lichfield, which we can only assume he arrived there. A few years later, two friends, Roy Taylor, 13, and Cecil Buck, 12, caught a train from Newport to Ryde one October afternoon in 1919. As the train raced through the woodland countryside, the engine driver looked back to see a carriage door open, and then watched in amazement as Roy and Cecil got out onto the footboard and then, clinging to the handrails, made their way to another compartment, opened the door and got in. Flushed with success, they went on to change compartments another 3 times before arriving at Ryde St John's Road, where they were apprehended. A few weeks later they appeared in court. The County Press reported, "The fathers of the defendants said they were very good boys. They had thrashed them for their conduct. The chairman said he was very glad to hear it. Taylor's father said the boys were out for a joyride. They were fined 5 shillings. The next unscheduled departure from the carriage came the following year. On a freezing cold December night, a young man and woman, strangers to each other, were sharing the same compartment in a train from Freshwater to Newport. As it sped through the woods between Cowbourne and Carisbrooke, the woman opened the door and hurled herself from the train into the darkness. Under the headline, "The Girl Out of the Train," the County Press reported considerable alarm was caused on Tuesday evening when a gentleman passenger on the 5:30 p.m. train from Freshwater reported that a young lady travelling in the same compartment had suddenly jumped from the train. Police and railway officials searched the line and found the young woman in a dazed state close to the platform at Watching-Well Station. The lady from Newport, named Rayner, escaped with nothing worse than shock. What went on in the carriage remained unclear. The County Press said the incident gave rise to all sorts of rumours in Newport, but inquiries proved her rash action was not due to any unpleasant incident. By her own admission, the gentleman entered into quite ordinary conversation with her, but she became alarmed and felt impelled to get into another compartment. The gentleman said he was astounded to see her open the door and step out before he had a chance to stop her. The girl had a wonderful escape from serious injury, if not death. Have a safe journey of what remains of our railway.
And now we come to my view. And the first one is from Jonathan Young. Ferry's pledge is the one to watch. With the exception of those who traditionally go sleepless on election night, the island will be waking this morning with a new MP on the way to Westminster. With access to neither a crystal ball nor time travel, I fall back on the bookies' odds, which imply a probability of more than 98% that Tory Bob Seeley will have landed the prize. But whoever it is, the burning question which for me needs answering is, what will actually be done to arrest and reverse our relentless slide into rural degeneration? I was sorry to have missed the CP's husting event, as the campaign neared its end, having been called away to be copiously rained on in Scotland. But I did note, with a great deal of interest, Bob's pledge, his very top priority in fact, that he would set up an Isle of Wight bill which will re-regulate the ferries. Bob has laid great emphasis on the advantages he sees in being a member of the governing party in Westminster. And if those bookies are right, he'll now have the chance to demonstrate what he means by that. The ferries are, of course, a well-rehearsed part of the problem, and if Bob succeeds in regulating them by legislation, then he'll have achieved something Andrew Turner didn't even attempt. He'll also have swum against the Conservative ideological tide in a fairly spectacular way, so good luck to him with that one. The same goes for wide swathes of the economy, which were once regarded as public services, but which politicians, mostly those sporting Bob's blue colours, have down the years decided are really businesses, which prove themselves viable or shrink or cease. Everywhere on the island there are examples, and everywhere there are problems. Bus deregulation, 1986, with its lack of a public service obligation and its perverse bar on cross-route subsidies. The business models now being imposed on the National Health Service, which place at risk all but the most basic island-based services. The privatisation of our schools, which entitles the companies running them to put profit before pupils. The subordination and the council's highway authority to a remote multinational with contractual accountability, let alone public accountability, no more than an unfulfilled ambition 4 years in. And now there is the post office. Rural post offices have never been more important as a barrier between their customers and intolerable isolation. The banks, never under an obligation to serve anyone except themselves, have progressively withdrawn to the larger towns as the internet reduces demand for counter services, and local post offices have largely done a good job in offering basic banking services. Excuse me. Yet, on an increasing regular basis, we are seeking examples of villages being deprived of their post offices or threatened with their removal because of a nationally directed drive for modernisation by Post Office Limited, a government-owned company separate from the privatised Royal Mail. This typically requires building work, which local businesses or local communities are expected to fund, in part or part of the franchising agreement. Within the last few weeks, the people of Seaview, without a post office for more than a year, have been told they'll need to cough up £10,000 of the £12,500 needed to install a dedicated counter at the local pharmacy. They're understandably upset. Seaview is a sizable village, The notion it should have a whip around for a post office, or the parish council should have to spend its precept to provide one, is absurd. There are other examples on the island bubbling away under the surface. Back to our new MP then. Election promises, as my fellow scribbler Malcolm Mine pointed out recently, can be rashly made, but can also rather inconveniently be dredged up months or years later by the pesky electorate. Bob Seeley knows this very well, so obviously, if elected, he'll sort the ferries out first. Shall we allow him his first 100 days? Because there'll be plenty more to be getting on with after that.
Okay, we're now going to move to What's On, and at Shanklin Theatre on Thursday, June the 15th, Best of the West End and Beyond. Friday the 16th is IDTC present Oscar Night, same as Saturday the 17th. Thursday the 22nd is Best of the West End and Beyond. Friday the 23rd is the ELO Experience. Thursday the 29th is Best of the West End and Beyond again. And Friday the 30th is the ABBA Reunion. And the box office number is 86800.
And in Shorewell, there's the Midsummer Fair, and it will return for its 57th year. The traditional village fair held in the grounds of North Court House, Shorewell, next Saturday, June the 17th, raises money for local charities and community groups. The family-friendly fair will include a tea tent and arena events, including a falconry display, a dog demonstration and live music from 1:30 to 5. There's free parking and children under 16 go free.
Roses and more on show. Numwell House off West Lane, Braden is open under the charity National Garden Scheme on Sunday. I have watched the garden development over the years, from the time when it was Yoglander family home to when it had jousting on the lawns and to the care lavished on it by the current and previous owner. Numwell has 5 acres of formal and shrub borders, and the old-fashioned shrub roses should be at their peak. There are beautiful silent views, a small arboretum and a walled former kitchen garden, which now has herbaceous borders.
And there's songs and variations, songs ranging from The Visit of Oz to Les Miserables, and it will feature in a summer concert by the Bembridge Singers on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. The concert, which will comprise a medley of widely varying styles of music, will be held at Holy Trinity Church, Bembridge. The programme will also include popular favourites such as Over the Rainbow and a 4-part arrangement from Elgar's Enigma Variations. The ensemble will be accompanied by Anne Gardner under the direction of Alistair Nye, and entry is free for under 18s.
My Balmoral will be coming home this month, and islanders and holidaymakers are invited aboard for a full circumnavigation of the Isle of Wight. Built in 1949 at Southampton Thornycroft Yard to ferry passengers between Southampton and Cowes, the MF Balmoral was the flagship of the Red Admiral funnel line for 2 decades. In its prime, the ship would also provide scenic trips around the island in the summer shows. Since its withdrawal from the fleet in 1968, the fascinating coastal excursion vessel has carried more than 2 million passengers, to have served twice as many as the Royal Yacht and visited most ports in the UK. On Friday, June the 16th and Sunday, June the 18th, the MF Balmoral will dock at Yarmouth Pier, providing islanders with the opportunity to come aboard by a trip around the Isle of Wight's stunning coastline. If you want more information, phone 0117 325 6200.
And it's turning the tables on John. It will be a reversal of roles for showbiz writer and broadcaster John Hannon when he is interviewed by Paul Armfield at Key Arts, Newport, on Wednesday the 21st of June. Over the years, he has interviewed Paul, who came up with this idea on several occasions, but this is the first time John has been interviewed publicly in an island theatre. He's looking forward to the evening and the chance to be in a different seat. During his 43 years as a showbiz writer and broadcaster, he has interviewed more than 4,000 people from the entertainment industry. Last October, John brought out his latest book, The John Hannon Interviews, featuring the stories behind his interviews with pop stars of the 50s, 60s and 70s. This is selling well and will be available on the night. It is likely this follow-up book, Stars of Stage and Screen, may get a mention. This is due out in October with a foreword by Jimmy Tarbuck. John told the County Press, "I'm excited about the night, with just a little trepidation. I hope Paul will be gentle with me. I haven't told him yet I want him to sing a couple of his fantastic songs. I'm sure he will." The show, Paul Armfield Meets John Hannon, starts at 7:30 and tickets are available through the normal sources.
And that's us finished for today, so it's goodbye from Paul.
And goodbye from Imelda. Have a lovely weekend.
This is a download from the BBC. For more information and our terms of use, go to www.bbc.co.uk/in-touch. With just 2 days to go before the general election, Gary O'Donoghue has been combing through the manifestos to see what they have to say about visual impairment and how easily blind and partially sighted people could read them. And we hear from the man whose employment prospects have gone from the floor to the ceiling. How did that happen? But first, at the last general election, Rachel Andrews went to cast her vote. She wanted what most people want, the chance to vote independently and in secret. But what happened next mirrored a number of cases that we've heard about and featured after many recent general elections.
My husband and myself and my mother-in-law, who's fully sighted, my husband's blind, we turned up at the polling station to vote. We went in, we handed over our polling cards, and I said I will need the tactile voting device, which was met with some confusion and silence and I don't know about that, I never heard about it. And I said, well, it's a legal requirement and I will need it, as my husband will also need it, in order to vote as a sight-impaired person.
And this is a device which enables you, it's like a template, and it enables you to know and be able to mark the spot of the person you want to vote for.
Yes, that's correct. It has flaps that you lift up and you have to count down to pick your candidate.
So what happened next?
Well, another chap came over and I repeated my request and he said, we don't have one. And I said, well, it's a legal requirement. You must have one and I need it to vote. So could you go and look? So he went away for about 10 seconds, I would estimate, came back and said, no, we don't have it. And he said, well, we don't have one. End of story. Do you want to vote or not? And I said, well, yeah, of course I do. I said I'd prefer my mother-in-law to help me and so she did.
Some people seem to have got the idea that you need to make an appointment at the polling station if you need any extra help. Now, that isn't correct. Presumably, you expected just to turn up and be able to vote.
I did, exactly. I mean, I've been voting as a visually impaired person for a long time, and in the past we have had issues where they've not known about the tactile voting device, but they have made an effort. They've sometimes had the wrong device, cut it up so it'll fit, and been very, very helpful. But unfortunately, in this circumstance, they were not interested at all.
So what did you do afterwards?
I came home and phoned the local electoral department at the council to make a complaint, and I said, can you tell me why I didn't have this device? And they said they should have had it. I said, yes, I know, but could you tell me why they didn't have it? And they said, well, we'll get back to you next week because obviously we're busy at the moment. So I let that go. The story went on, and then in a couple of weeks' time I got back to them and said, can you please categorically tell me why you didn't have this item? It's a legal requirement. And they said, well, we can only apologise, and perhaps the presiding officer was too busy to look for it.
So you decided to take action, basically?
I did, yes. I contacted the RNIB and they put me on to a legal firm who helped me basically start a legal process. And eventually we settled out of court with the council.
What's the fundamental point you feel that you've made here?
I think fundamentally my frustration was not only with their attitude that they didn't have it and that was the end of the story, but I feel personally as a disabled person that discrimination due to disability is something that's often basically ignored, and the reasonable response from a lot of companies and a lot of bodies seems to be, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't know, we won't do it again. And I felt that it really needed to be taken further and that some legal actions to actually uphold the law that's already in place needed to be taken.
Rachel Andrews. Well, we asked Rachel's local council to respond. They told us, we have apologised to Mrs Andrews in relation to her voting experience during the 2015 general election, and as a result we've improved our voting systems for all our visually impaired residents. On the occasions that Mrs Andrews has voted since, we've liaised closely with her to support her to vote more confidently and independently. Well, so said Broadland District Council. It is important to say that this was a settlement, not a court decision. That means it doesn't set a precedent for other cases. But the Representation of the People Act does give the right of secrecy and independence already. Well, the RNIB has been campaigning on this issue for some time now, and as with previous elections, they surveyed visually impaired voters about their experiences, both of casting their vote and access to election material, like campaign literature. Hugh Huddy of the RNIB explained what the survey had found.
The key findings were that half of blind and partially sighted people said they didn't feel able to vote independently or in secret. And those are the two things which are fundamental to our voting system in this country. So that remains a concern, because the previous year's survey in 2015 showed almost exactly the same number.
Doesn't that mean the policy of bringing out surveys to draw people's attention to what's going wrong just isn't working?
It's not the surveys that are wrong. What the surveys are doing is enabling blind and partially sighted people to say what their experience is.
Electronic voting is happening in quite a lot of parts of the world. It's certainly happening in the States. Wouldn't a full-on campaign for that be the way to go?
Yes, we have been making representations to the Cabinet Office and to the Electoral Commission for a long time now that accessible voting systems that are used in other countries need to be looked at, and the Political and Constitutional Reform Select Committee back in 2015, which I remember giving evidence to at the time, also recommended that different ways of voting need to be explored for the whole population, not just for blind and partially sighted people.
I mean, I guess what I'm suggesting, you could be taking more direct action than you appear to be taking.
The action that we're taking is not necessarily all in the public domain. The action we're taking is directly to the Cabinet Office, to the Electoral Commission. There have been a number of legal cases over the last few years which RNIB has been involved with. I think what we're trying to highlight behind the scenes as much as in front of the scenes, we've had a campaign running for years, and we, like many organisations, we're wanting the next election to be the most accessible election ever. We're surveying again, and we will be working with blind and partially sighted people afterwards if they don't get an accessible election.
Hugh Huddy of the RNIB. So what about the actual content of the election campaign? We asked BBC political correspondent Gary O'Donoghue, who is of course blind himself, to find out how accessible the political party manifestos were and what was in them. But first, just how much has disability, and particularly issues likely to affect visually impaired voters, featured in the debate so far?
Well, very little in a sense, because it's a particularly difficult election in normal circumstances, isn't it? It's an election called at the last minute. It's an election really that's focused on some very narrow range of issues, specifically and deliberately done so by the parties. So on the one hand, you've got the Conservatives wanting to focus on Brexit and leadership issues. You've got the Labour Party wanting to focus on public services. So the compressed nature of the campaign and this sort of impetus on both sides of in the main parties and other parties too, to narrow the range of things that are discussed, means that disability hasn't had much of a look in, really. It did get a rather high profile look in, if you like, last Friday during one of those special question time debates when a woman recounted her experience of the work capability assessment. And she was very emotional about that and told Theresa May how she'd been treated. And she actually had a sight problem as well. So it did come up then. And, of course, that is something that the parties do have something to say about.
Of course, always of natural concern to blind and partially sighted people are disability benefits. How much difference is there between party policies on this?
Things like, for example, personal independence payments. That is something that clearly the Conservatives are very keen on pushing through and continuing to move people off the old DLA onto PIPs. Some of the parties are not happy about the assessment process, so Labour's talked about getting rid of that, as have people like the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the SNP. There's also some specifics in the Labour manifesto. For example, they're talking about adding £30 to the employment support allowance for those in the work-related group. So there's some very specific ones in that. And the Scottish National Party, interestingly, are talking about no means testing of disability benefits, which is interesting because we don't really see many disability benefits means tested at the moment. And
what about employment? Because in a way, with the work capability assessment, that's both a benefits issue and an employment issue, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And most of the parties, including the minor parties, have got sections where they deal with the disability and work. So, for example, the Green Party want a general principle where people don't work more than 4 days a week. That would obviously impact disabled people. The Conservatives are talking about getting 1 million disabled people back into work over the next 10 years. And other parties are talking about improving access to work. The Liberal Democrats are talking about that. And Plaid Cymru are talking about improving access to work for disabled people as well. One of the parties is talking about extending access to work to people who are self-employed, which of course they can already apply for.
Which does suggest sometimes that perhaps some of the parties don't know maybe as much about the benefits system and disability affairs as they might.
I think that's right. And I think, as I say, this is a very rushed election, a very sort of compressed timetable, and I suspect a lot of this stuff had to be dashed out in something of a rush and may not be entirely thought through.
The picture you're painting is of quite a lot of agreement, if you like, between the parties. What are the differences? I mean, they can't all be saying the same thing on everything.
No, I mean, a lot of this, of course, is always about arguments over means to ends. So the ends are often agreed upon. Yes, of course, people want more disabled people in work. They want better support for them. They want better access to information, etc. So it's often an argument about the means to get there. So the Conservatives, for example, are talking very specifically about sort of digital access to government and to other services, and putting that in a sort of disability context as something that's important for disabled people in particular.
Well, the idea that this kind of equipment could empower disabled people.
Yes, and give you access to services, give you access to government and to what you might need to do when you interact with government in an independent way as a disabled person. So that's an interesting emphasis, I think, that you're seeing from them. Another difference in some of the approaches relates to things like education, for example. So you've got the UK Independence Party talking about reversing what they call the policy on closing special schools. Now, as far as I know, there isn't a policy on closing special schools, but it's interesting that they focus on that part of it, whereas a lot of the other parties, particularly the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats too, and the Greens, talking more about improving inclusive education, improving the sort of facilities and the funding for people in mainstream schools.
Much of the campaign, of course, is centred on Brexit, and one issue to be settled still is incorporating EU law into UK law. There's quite a lot of EU legislation relating to disability, isn't there? What do we learn from the manifestos about that?
Well, this is a really uncharted area. So, of course, the Conservatives are talking about a great repeal bill going through when Brexit happens that effectively incorporates European law into British law. But of course, at that point, and during that process, I'm sure there will be opportunities to change the kinds of provisions that Europe held sway over. So that will be, I think, an area where the disability groups will be doing a lot of lobbying. There's also, of course, the Conservatives talking about repealing the Human Rights Act and replacing that with something else. I think disability groups will be interested in that. Whereas you've got people like the Labour Party and the SNP and others talking about specifically holding on to the Human Rights Act, which I think some disabled people will regard as a positive thing.
How did you read these manifestos, Gary?
Well, I read them largely online, and they are online. And the Labour Party and the Greens, for example, have specific disability manifestos online. Quite, shortish documents. The Labour one, I think, was 25 pages. The Green one was just 5 pages. So those are online. Most of the other manifestos are online as well. In fact, they all are. Some of them are offering alternative formats. Audio, for example. I think the SNP was saying their audio one's about to be available. Others suggest you can have that on request. I think I only saw perhaps 1 or 2 where Braille, specific hard copy Braille, was available on request. But of course, by this time, it's a little bit late.
And is that part of the reason for this, do you think, the sudden calling of the election?
I think that's partly it. I mean, generally speaking, in years gone by, the parties have been pretty good on producing Braille, for example. I mean, I remember getting Braille manifestos from all 3 parties in 1979. So it's not that they don't know that this stuff is needed or is what people want. But of course, I think they like a lot of other organisations, will think that access online now is where most people get their information. And it's a question of whether it's made readable in a kind of comfortable way online and not just a sort of unlabelled PDF download, which, of course, a lot of visually impaired people struggle with.
Indeed. Gary O'Donoghue. And now, back to the real world. And some good news too. The mantra of many visually impaired job seekers is that half the battle when getting jobs is just to get to an interview. And this was certainly true in the case of Ian Brooks. Now, you may recall that computer programmer Ian had an interview lined up with a prospective employer. It had been fixed up by an employment agency. Ian disclosed his visual impairment to the agency, and just as they were making the arrangements for Ian to go to an interview, things began to go wrong for him.
I got a call from the agent to say the client had cancelled my interview and told the agent they didn't want a guide dog in the office because they didn't think their landlord would allow it on the premises. And secondly, they don't think there's enough room for me and the dog in the office.
How did you feel about that?
I just completely melted. I'm normally a quite strong, determined sort of guy, but I was crying inwardly and I was a raging bull, basically. I was absolutely furious, being treated so badly because of my disability.
But Ian is back with us now to explain what's happened since.
My usual outlook on life is to every obstacle I come across is to find a way around. But with this particular problem, I couldn't find a way around it. And I turned around to my wife one night, which really shocked her, and said to her, I said, you know what, Kath, I can't wait to die. It made me feel so alone.
And that is such a serious thing for you to have told us that I'm bound to ask you. Was it simply that rejection, or were there perhaps other elements?
It was simply because I felt worthless. I felt like I had nowhere to go in the rest of my life. Nobody wanted to employ a blind programmer with a guide dog.
And yet, Ian, then that has now been a positive outcome, hasn't he? Tell us about that. What's happened?
Due to large exposure on social media, a company called Conspexit in London heard about me. They got in contact with me via the RNIB and invited me in. I went in on the 23rd of May, spent a day with them, went out for a meal and was made a fuss of. And then 2 days later, they offered me a job.
And clearly that's made an enormous difference to your attitude to life and to yourself.
Well, that's right, yeah. I mean, it really is a case of light and dark. For quite a while I was left in the dark, and now my life is just full of possibilities, and I just can't wait to get started. A phrase I've been using is the fact that I'm now living in a world of possibilities rather than living a life of limitations.
I mean, that's the message is clear in what you've said and the tone of your voice, the difference it's made from an emotional point of view. What about financially?
It's made a huge amount of difference to my life. Well, it will do. I'll now be able to save some money. I'll be able to put some money aside for a pension, ready for, in the distant future. Me and my wife will be able to live a decent life, go back to visit my friends in New York, eventually go and, watch the 49ers play in San Francisco. I'll be able to help my daughters out.
Ian Brooks And I think you'll agree, he sounds like a changed man. And talking of pensions, just reminds me of a suggestion from listener Michael Kelly, who's contemplating retirement, but he's worrying whether he can find enough things to occupy his time. He'd like your suggestions, and so would we. We also would like your comments and views about today's programme. You can call our action line on 0800 044 044 for 24 hours after the programme. You can email intouch@bbc.co.uk, or you can go online to download the podcast of tonight's and many other editions of the programme. That's it from me, Peter Wight, producer Lee Kumatat, and the team. Goodbye.